Perfect. And for those of you who are going to stay on, please, if you have any questions, we do ask that you put them in the Q&A. Now, those are questions related to tonight's information for our speaker. If you have questions about technology or an issue with Zoom, you can put that in the chat and myself or Hannah will help you out. But questions about the program, please put them in the Q&A so they don't get lost in the chat. Of course, if you're having technical difficulties accessing the Q&A, you can always put it in the chat and we will make sure to keep record of it so that it does get asked tonight. Also, closed captions are on, so they're at the bottom of your screen. If you should need that, they can be turned on there. You can also find the raise hand function, which we don't typically use, but if you have an issue, we can try to help you out with that. Other than that, I believe that is most of our housekeeping. We will be sending the recording out within the next couple of days, either tomorrow or very early next week for you all to have access to and be able to rewatch or again, share with others. So please participate in the poll if you haven't already. I will say that I was looking at the results and it does look like most of our attendees tonight do not currently have pet insurance, and about a third of them are interested, not or don't think it's worth it, and the other 2/3 are thinking about it. So just for our speakers' knowledge tonight, that's kind of where we're at with the poll and pet insurance. And I will pass it off to Hannah now to introduce tonight's speaker. So thank you everyone for joining.
Oh, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining tonight's Pet Talk. Pet insurance, do I really need it, with Dr. Julie Smith. Dr. Smith is a veterinary surgeon, veterinary business owner, and board member of Sage Compassion for Animals, a nonprofit awarding grants to pet parents that cannot afford veterinary care that their pets need. She is also one of the 9 veterinarians in the United States who has been chosen to sit on the Veterinary Economic Strategy Committee that examines the economics of the veterinary industry that impact pet owners, pets, and the veterinary community. We are thrilled to have Dr. Smith as tonight's speaker. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Hannah and Ashley. And thank you guys for being able to make it this evening. I'm really happy to have you here and happy to talk pet insurance. And as Hannah was saying, my background is a veterinary surgeon, and where I'm sitting is in Northern California. So you can imagine a lot of what I did during my career was fairly costly. And the other thing I chose surgery for is because I like to fix things. And so as a surgeon, there was a lot of instances where I knew I could really help the pet or actually make the pet return to complete normalcy. And then sometimes it was just the finances that got in the way. And so after seeing that for many years, and obviously as one of the business owners or practice owners could see that in with my colleagues as well, it was kind of a natural thing as I retired to start thinking about how could I help? How could we help, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area where things are a bit more costly? How could we help pet owners afford the care that their pets need? And one of the topics that I've always been interested in for like 30 years of my career is pet insurance. And so for those people that can afford pet insurance, how do we have the discussion? As Ashley was saying, there's a lot of you that are not sure it's worth it. So let's talk today about that, and hopefully we'll give you some tips to maybe change your mind a little bit, but at least to be able to research it in a methodical and useful way. So I do title the talk, "Do I Really Need It?" regarding pet insurance, because that's the question I've gotten for literally 30 years of my life. In fact, I just had it like last week from a friend of a friend. So it's a very common question that we get. And why it's interesting for me, and especially in the US, is a couple of the graphs I'm going to show. And I'm going to try to get you some data tonight, so it's just not going to be completely my opinion. And I'm going to tell you where that data comes from, because it is interesting to know where we stand in the US about pet insurance. And it's actually only about 3.8% of pets are covered by pet insurance in the United States. And I'm going to talk mostly about dogs and cats, but there are, pet insurances for exotics and so forth as well. But this data mostly reflects dogs and cats. And if you think about it, that's 3.8%. That's not very many. And if you've been reading the paper, and sometimes, especially during COVID, there was a lot of, talk around all these people going out and buying pet insurance now. It's increasing 25, 30%. Well, that's because 3 years ago, it was only 2.8% of Americans that had pet insurance. And you can see compared to the UK and Sweden, which represents kind of the data of Europe, it's a very low adoption rate in our country. And what's even more interesting is I sit, as I said, in Northern California, and we have the highest rate of pet insurance adoption at 18.6%. So only 18.6% of Californians have it. Guess what? For those of you with Connecticut, only 1.9% of pet owners in Connecticut have pet insurance. And we like to say, well, that's 5.6 million pets that are covered. It's 147 million pets that are not covered by pet insurance. And on top of that, this other graph kind of shows a little bit of a disparity in thinking, because when we talk to Canadians that have a higher rate of adoption of pet insurance than Americans do, 80% of pet owners will say, I'm pretty sure I can afford the pet care that my pet will need. I'm not that worried about it. You ask the same question to Americans, and less than 60% will answer in the positive. So that means over 40% of Americans don't feel they can afford the care that their pet needs, but only 3.8% of them have gone out and got pet insurance. So you're like, why, right? And there's a couple of theories. One is, unfortunately, when pet insurance first started in America in the 1980s, it was horrible. It was absolutely ghastly. And I was just starting to kind of my adventure in veterinary medicine at that point in time. So I lived through the really horrible pet insurance component. And for those of you who want some cocktail trivia, the first pet that was ever insured was Lassie back in 1982. And the company that insured Lassie was called VPI. That company is no longer with us. It was acquired. And it was horrible. It gave horrible customer service, ghastly. I mean, insurance companies aren't known for their customer service in general, no matter what insurance you're talking about. But it was really bad. They denied most of everything right off the bat. And on top of it, and we're going to talk about, this is the important thing, what insurance in the past is very different than insurance in the right now. So we'll talk about what makes insurance a much better product than it was back in the day. But back in the day, what would happen is they would cover the insurance claim based on the disease process. So for those of you who have dogs, you might have heard that there's a common problem when they tear their cruciate ligament or their ACL in their knee. It's been common for decades now. And they would just say, we are going to give you the amount of money, the average cruciate surgery costs across America. That's what we're going to refund you. Didn't matter what you actually paid. And in fact, as a boarded surgeon, we tended to have a little bit more specialty training, and we actually did a higher level procedure back in the 1990s, which is now very common, called the TPLO, but they would be reimbursed on the more standard procedure on the average cost. And again, in North Carolina or Northern California, that only maybe they got reimbursed 30% of what they put out. So it was a very bad product. And obviously, a lot of people have that still kind of in the back of their mind, I think. The other thing is that I know for me growing up, when I was thinking about my cats and dogs that I grew up with, I remember my mom, usually my mom, not my dad, taking the cats or the dog to the veterinarian, but not very often. And I kind of, especially the cats who were indoor, outdoor, they kind of went to the veterinarian maybe when they got sick as they got older and maybe didn't come back from the veterinarian. And so we kind of have this thought in mind, like, my pets don't go to the veterinarian that often. Well, we'll talk about that as well and show how that shift in how we think about pets, and especially pets and what they mean to us in society nowadays is a little different. And not to mention, of course, the advances of veterinary medicine that is available to help with keeping your pets healthy and living longer. So to kind of have a little bit more insight into that question, and maybe some of you are thinking this right now, Forbes did a study where, and everything, all the data I've given to you is only about a couple years old, 1 or 2 years of age. So they're pretty recent data that I'm sharing here. The question was, why didn't you buy pet insurance to pet owners? And 42% did say it was too expensive. Well, first and foremost, the words too expensive mean one of two things. It means that something's really costly, like a Learjet. A Learjet, I think we can all agree, is very costly. Or if you say it's too expensive, it's too expensive for what I want to pay for it. So, for example, Charmin toilet paper. I think that's too expensive. I like my recycled toilet paper, but that's my opinion and that's my judgment. And I live in California, so we like everything recycled. So, so it doesn't mean that Charmin toilet paper is the most expensive thing on the planet. It just means it's too expensive for me. So there's a judgment call when people say it's too expensive. But what's interesting about this study is that of the people that were asked this question and thought it was too expensive, 89% didn't even have the cost correct. And 76% of them overestimated it by 3 times the actual cost. We're going to talk a lot today about the actual cost and what changes and can change that cost and those premiums. And hopefully, again, give you some really solid data to determine if it's too expensive in your mind or in your judgment. And only 11% were correct that the average cost was about $50 per month. And you're like, wait, I pay more than that. Or maybe some of you are saying, wait, I pay less than that. Okay, we'll talk about the average cost because it is. There's a lot of things that change those premiums. 24% of the people in this study just didn't think they would need it, which kind of goes back to my previous statement. But guess what? Data shows 4 out of 5 pets will have a medical emergency. So that means some reason to go to the veterinarian, 4 out of 5. And there's even a study that just looked at dogs, that looked at mixed breed dogs versus breed dogs. And they showed there was no difference. So just because you get a mixed breed or a mutt doesn't mean you're not going to be able to, or you're not going to have to necessarily go to the veterinarian. And so the data in more than one study shows at least 4 out of 5 pets have a medical emergency within their lifespan. So that means you are likely going to have to go to the veterinarian for other than routine care. And then 21% said didn't think it was worth it. So what do we mean by that again? Even though 21% of people didn't think it was worth it, 100% of people in this survey would feel stressed if the cost of an emergency visit was over $2,500. I can guarantee you in Northern California that is a very real number. And in fact, there's a lot higher numbers now in the state of California. And for those of you that might be joining from there, you also know that your pet insurance is probably more expensive because you live in an expensive area. And we'll talk about everything that goes into those expenses of those premiums. But to me, that's very interesting. That goes to show, again, there's a disconnect between what pet insurance can give and provide and what people's perception of pet insurance is. A great resource is a group called the North American Pet Health Insurance Association, or NAPHIA. And NAPHIA is a trade group, but they have a nice website. And for those of you who want more information or want different information or get information a little differently than by listening to a webinar, their website will go through things and to look for pet insurance because they represent all the pet insurance companies in the country. They're agnostic. They're not going to weigh one over the other. And in fact, there is 36 US companies offering 50 products. So that's a lot to comb through. And we hate insurance. All of us do, whether it's healthcare, whether it's car insurance, whether it's home insurance, is mind-boggling and it's annoying and it's nothing that all of us want to research. So it's understandable that this is confusing. We also have, and I'll share our website at the end of the talk, we have more resources on our website that are, again, agnostic, meaning you can go to get more advice and more tips and so forth without necessarily being a particular company that's giving you that. And NerdWallet as well. And do be careful if you Google best pet insurance out there, because you will get sponsored websites. And even though they don't declare themselves as sponsored, they usually are. This group, NAFIA, is also wonderful about data. And if you haven't figured out, I'm a bit of a data nerd. And so this comes straight from, again, they're bringing together all of the data from all of the pet insurance companies in the country, and the most common conditions claimed in both dogs and cats. And if you look at these conditions, they're not very unusual. I would say if I had another poll, how many of you have had a dog that vomited? A lot of people would say yes. You know, cats, their diabetes is quite common in the cat, or kidney problems, very common. These are actual claims. These are actually been claims that have been paid out. So these things happen to pets. Allergies. Allergies aren't life-threatening, but they're long-lived. In fact, the average age for allergies to come on board, both food allergy and skin allergies in dogs in particular, is 1 year of age. So that can be years of treating a chronic condition. That can add up. And here's some cost comparisons. Now, again, this data comes straight from the insurance companies. So these are obviously pets that were insured. This is annual data. So the number one claim was only within 1 year, was $51,000 for a golden retriever with lymphoma. Now I can hear some of you, well, I can't hear anybody because you're on mute, but I can hear people, well, I would never pay that much for a dog for cancer because lymphoma is a cancer. But guess what? Cancer is just like in human medicine. Some cancers are treatable to the point where they go into remission or even cure, whereas others are not, right? And so lymphoma just happens to be one of those cancers in the dog that a large portion of dogs, not all dogs, can respond very well to. And so, you know, cancer can be covered. The next dog, the Bernese Mountain Dog here, another $50,000 claim for heart disease. So mitral valve regurgitation is a heart disease. And guess what? That's a congenital heart disease. That dog was born with that problem. And obviously, it also needed very specialized care because treatment for that condition, especially at a surgical center, has to be at a university. And in fact, that case has actually probably a worse prognosis or potential outcome than the lymphoma does, but they were able to have an inherited condition covered for quite a lot of money. So these things might seem a little extreme to you, but let's look at some average data from a different source. So now we got some other cost comparisons. Now this data is a little bit older. It's still around, I like to call it still post-COVID data because we all kind of have that in our brain. But it's a few years older. So the average lifetime cost of veterinary care versus the lifetime cost of total care. And this data came from a company called CareCredit. And CareCredit is a third-party lender. And so again, it's a subset of people, of pet owners that could get CareCredit and elected to get CareCredit to help pay for their veterinary bills. And so not everybody can get that. In fact, the nonprofit Sage Compassion for Animals that I helped found, most of the people that apply to us get denied CareCredit because they don't make enough money or they have bad credit. So it's not a predatory lender, and not everybody can get it. But those that did, this was the average lifetime cost of care. So these do include people who did not have pet insurance, obviously, because as we talked about, there's not as many people that have that in America. But these costs are fairly significant, and they're a few years old. And we know that 2023 and 2024 saw fairly large spikes in veterinary costs across the country. Those spikes it was a higher percentage than what even inflation was after the COVID started coming back down. And so these are older numbers. So my guess is that survey would show a higher cost nowadays. And if you look at that, it's a big range on the dog because size matters. So we're going to talk a little bit again of what impacts premiums and so forth. And certain breeds are larger, and certain breeds of dogs will cost you more at the veterinarian, no matter what, because of the cost of drugs, but also the cost of how many people might need to be involved in lifting that dog onto a table. No, I'm kidding slightly, but for animals that are very large that are not walking, say in ICU, sometimes you need 2 to 3 technicians to actually work with that pet. So larger animals do cost more money. And especially when you talk about the lifetime cost of total care, because that includes food, right? So do be aware of that. The cat tends to be about the same size. So that's why there's only one number there. Now, if you look at the average premiums, this data is from NAFIA. So this data comes straight from the insurance companies. And then it's been consolidated from all of the insurance companies. And this data is from 2023. So it's fairly recent. Maybe, again, slightly higher now. I can guarantee you it's higher. But we're talking in that 56, probably now 60-ish zone for a monthly premium for a dog, and 30-ish zone for the cat. If you annualize that, and then of course do the lifetime, and I chose to do a lifetime of 15 years. It's just math. I just multiplied it through. And 15 years is not that unusual nowadays, especially for cats and dogs to live that long, because we have advances in veterinary care. We have people that are potentially doing more than maybe a generation before. Because remember too, when we're talking about pets, we're talking about usually ending their life with euthanasia. It's much more common for a pet to be euthanized than they are to just die of natural causes. So euthanasia has a decision point process in it. So a lot of lifetime numbers are influenced by, unfortunately, decisions and decisions that are very, very hard for us to make. Even as a veterinarian, having to provide euthanasia and also making the decision myself for the pets, it's always something that none of us want to be faced with, but unfortunately we usually are. And so that impacts, again, the lifetime of pets. But if you look at those numbers, they're not that different. And of course, as I said, data is only, there's different subsets, and it's a little bit old, but at the same time, when you're looking at averages, and again, these are averages, so there's a lot of people spending more, a lot of people spending less, same with the average lifetime. So when we're looking at just math, pet insurance doesn't look that expensive compared to what you might have to pay anyway. So let's talk more about what can influence that expense, because I think that's why most of you are here today. To tell you the truth, we're going to spend a lot of time on this slide. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to walk through the criteria that you might need to think about when you're choosing pet insurance. And spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell you there's one good pet insurance company out there, and this is what you should absolutely do, because it's going to depend on your budget. It's going to depend on how you want to view insurance, and what you want your insurance to do for you. And it also might, determine what other resources you have in emergent situations. So I'm going to talk through all of it, and then hopefully you guys can kind of apply that as you're going through your own criteria as we walk through it. The other thing is a lot of the websites, when you go to ask for a quote, will let you put in some of these variables, and you can see the impact on the monthly premium. Because my goal would be to help you get the lowest premium and still get quality insurance. Because the premium is what you have to pay no matter if you use this insurance, correct? And so you'd like that at the lowest amount that it still makes sense to get it. Now, some people ask about self-funding, and that's fine. Looking back at those numbers that I said that sometimes you might have to pay, as long as you're okay self-funding, say $5,000 to $10,000, then that might be your choice. I will caution you that it might take you a while to get to $5,000 to $10,000 if you just start saving when you get the pet. Whereas insurance, the minute it kicks in, can help you pay for the pet. So all of these are factors, and we'll walk through them now, kind of hopefully in a way that makes sense to you all. So first off is the type of insurance and the type of coverage. I'll say from my perspective and from most veterinarians' perspectives, the best pet insurance is an accident and illness policy. And what that means is that if your pet becomes acutely sick or chronically sick or has an accident, that is what you're getting the insurance for. It's really a risk mitigation tool. Now, unfortunately, when we think about our own healthcare insurance, we put a lot of stock in the fact that it's routine care that we're covered a lot for in human healthcare. And you can get that coverage too as for pet insurance, but you will pay a significantly more amount in that premium to get that, because here's one of the differences between human healthcare and veterinary care. Human healthcare has tons of data to show how much preventative care can save money in the long run. So they have the math to know how to set those premiums. We know in veterinary medicine that preventative care can helpfully prevent certain diseases, but we don't have the math. And so when the insurance companies are setting the premiums, they absolutely know that you will use the wellness care ones. Absolutely. So they're going to make sure you pay for that. So when we talk about routine care or preventative care in veterinary medicine, I'm going to use the term wellness care because it kind of includes all of that. That is something that can be budgeted for. So avoid putting it in your premium. It's kind of the opposite world from human health world, but it actually can really shrink your premiums. So wellness plans, you can get them from your primary care veterinarian. Generally speaking, you can kind of shop around and get an idea of how much those cost and what they cover, so you can do a lot of comparisons. And wellness plans are fairly popular with primary care veterinarians because what it does is it provides kind of a bundle of pricing for you and a reward for your loyalty for coming back and seeing them, which you should do anyway, because it's nice to have one veterinarian or at least one clinic know everything they can about your pet, just like, for us to have a primary care doctor. So wellness plans, and here's another confusion. Wellness plans are purchased at the veterinary clinic you're going to and are only used at the veterinary clinic or chain of veterinary clinics, because some of them have multiple sites. That's it. Pet insurance, what we're talking about today, is bought online and is agnostic and can be used across the country by any veterinary clinic. It's used everywhere. Unfortunately, some people, and maybe even some chains of veterinary clinics, have used the word insurance when they're explaining a wellness plan, and it gets confusing. So make sure that you really understand, if you're talking to your clinic, is this only used at the clinic? That's not pet insurance. That's a wellness plan. And so I recommend them, but do make sure that you know what you're getting in both situations. Wellness plan, one clinic, pet insurance, every clinic, because again, a lot of times you're going to use it in the middle of the night at an emergency clinic. So you want to make sure that pet insurance can be taken everywhere and you're getting it online. So that's a huge thing. Hopefully, that's cleared up some potential confusion between the difference. Another thing that can be covered or not covered is exam fees. Again, if you're doing a routine wellness exam package, that should be included in that. If you're talking about exam fees for emergency or specialty care, they can be a couple $100s. So you can either have them included or not in the plan. If you have them included, it's going to cost more in the premium. So it just depends on your budget. Can you afford a couple $100s? Do you want to afford a couple $100s? If you want everything included, then you want everything included. So just to give you a sense of what can increase or decrease your premiums. And these days, I would say the best plans out there, you should be finding a plan that doesn't exclude anything as far as disease processes. Now, again, if you don't choose the wellness package, it will exclude preventative care, vaccines, exams for routine care, spay and neuter, and dental. Now, dental is a big, weird thing because there's routine dentistry for cleaning and preventative, and then there's dentistry for disease processes, and they can be confusing. So again, adding and making sure that routine dentals are included in your package will increase your premiums. And not all pets are created equal, just like people. I have great teeth. I was born with them. It's nothing that I'm doing. I just have nice genetics. Some animals are the same, and then some animals have horrible teeth. And you won't know, unfortunately, necessarily, until it happens. But again, a fractured tooth because of an accident or something like that is an illness or an injury. So dental disease is a tricky one, again, to get covered. If you want it covered because that just makes you feel better about things and you just want to make sure it's all covered, that's great. Again, it's your choice. It'll increase your premiums. So just be aware that choices have consequences. And if you want decreased premiums, you say, I just want this for risk mitigation in case an accident or an illness happens. You'll have less premiums, but you won't have the routine care provided. But again, just depends on how you want to manage your money. And then waiting periods. Waiting periods should be short, should be only a few weeks, probably a couple weeks is the standard. You shouldn't have to wait 6 months for it to kick in. Don't take that one. Benefit paid, here's another key, like if you want to remember one thing from this, make sure that whatever policy you get, it pays out a percentage of the invoice. It's not dictating what the invoice should be, it's paying you a percentage on the invoice. And so that means if you go to a primary care for an illness, you go to an emergency clinic, you go to a specialty clinic, it's whatever their invoices are, it's a percentage of it. And you can pick a different percentage. I always recommend at least having them cover 70%, or else it's not worth it. 80% is probably a good target. If you want them to do 90%, that's nice. You'll just pay more in the premiums for it. So again, you can dial that in when you're trying to get a quote. Probably not going to cover 100%, but getting up there. So what's nice about that is, again, you can go to whichever clinic you need to go for that particular disease for your pet from the medical perspective and get that paid back. And I'll tell you just a story now. No, I'll wait to tell that story. But what's nice about it is, again, compared to that on that disease process that I mentioned at the beginning, then it gets all wonky. Like, how are they going to pay for it? You have a $5,000 invoice and 80% you get paid back, you get 80% back. That's very easy, very clear, harder to argue. Same with deductible level. Just like in human medicine, if you want a high deductible, or you don't want a high deductible, but you choose a high deductible, your premiums are lower. So it's the same thing. What can you afford as a deductible to lower your premiums? If you know, and you can choose that again and work through that with the quote. And then finally, benefit limits. Again, you want a limit that is unlimited, either on an annual basis, so time delimited, or a lifetime limit. You don't want a limit on a particular condition, because again, some of these chronic conditions can go on for years. So you want never to have to argue with the insurance company. So my 2 rules here is get your premiums as low as possible, and you just don't want to have to argue things. So annual's pretty easy. I spent this amount of money during this year. You can figure that out. I spent this amount of money over the lifetime of my pet. I can figure that out. So so those are just cleaner to be able to talk with insurance companies in case there is a dispute. Some other components to consider. One is that there are some companies that will have an automatic bump in premiums at a pet when a pet hits a certain age. Not all of them do. They will increase the premiums every year. That's a guarantee. My healthcare increased my premium 15% year over year for the last, I don't know how many years that I've been thinking about it, which I try not to think about. My car insurance goes up, my house insurance goes up, it'll all go up. Again, you might have seen some bumps in the last couple of years, especially certain parts of the country where veterinary costs went up. And guess what? All that does is tell you veterinary costs are now higher, so maybe I really should get pet insurance. They're doing it for a reason. You can look at, make sure you know what's going to cause a policy to cancel. Again, you know, there are some companies that say we'll never cancel on you. I don't know, never is a hard word, especially coming from the state of California where people are getting their fire insurance canceled right and left. Nationwide, you might have read that they canceled a number of policies. Those policies basically weren't canceled, they just weren't renewed. It was because they were super users. So there were people that generally use the policy a lot. So that's what's happening in California with fire insurance, and that's what's happening with pet insurance. It's what insurance does, right? They want to make money, so unfortunately they do those things from time to time. But do make sure that it's not random that they can do these kind of things on you. And we'll talk about one of the reasons why you don't necessarily want to have to change policies during the pet's life. That is because of pre-existing conditions, which we'll spend a lot of time on. So here's the thing about pet insurance, is that most of it is a reimbursement. And so that is why veterinarians mostly take pet insurance, because they're still just working with you. You're going to pay them, and the pet insurance is going to pay you back. So veterinarians actually are fairly agnostic about pet insurance. Hopefully they can help recommend ones that they have worked with and maybe know you better to personally recommend a couple of policies. But generally speaking, again, it's a reimbursement policy. There are, you know, a couple of groups out there that do have pre-approved, which they will pay the veterinarian directly, which is a nice convenience, and it's something you don't have to do out of pocket. But they might not necessarily do it at 2 o'clock in the morning. They might do it for a surgery that has to be scheduled, and that works great. Guess what? You're going to pay more in the premium for that. But if it gives you that peace of mind, it might be worth it. Otherwise, be prepared to either do, you know, a credit card, get some help from a friend, or, you know, companies like CareCredit can sometimes offer short credit lines that if you pay back with a certain period of time, there's no interest. So there's some options out there to be able to deal with the reimbursement But again, it's up to you and what you feel most comfortable with. If you like the idea of a pre-approval, awesome. There are some really good companies out there that do that. Just be aware of that will increase your premium. And then here's the biggest thing. Again, I told you percentage of invoice. Here's the next biggest thing. Get the policy when you get the pet. Whether it's when you adopt the pet as a rescue or when you purchase the pet from a breeder. Either way, get the policy when you get the pet because it avoids pre-existing conditions, right? So what can happen is, you know, and I'm going to tell you some stories and it might resonate with you, is that some people will say, well, you know, when the pet's young, nothing's going to happen, so I'm not going to get it when they're young. Well, this just happened to a friend of mine literally 2 weeks ago. A friend of a friend got a puppy. Puppy ended up getting into something and required an emergency visit within 2 weeks. And that was $5,000. So get the policy when you get the pet. And I'll even share more data because again, data nerd. Of the pets that we help as the nonprofit, mostly we're helping emergent situations and surgery, which can cost thousands of dollars. 2/3 are less than the age of 7. So just because they're young doesn't mean something won't happen. But the biggest reason to do it is because of pre-existing conditions. And pre-existing conditions are a problem in veterinary medicine compared to human medicine. Now, in human medicine, there's still an issues with pre-existing conditions depending on how you're getting your insurance. And so that can still be problematic, but it's really problematic in veterinary medicine. There's a couple reasons why. One is, unlike in human medicine, they have diagnostic coding for everything. In fact, the insurance companies dictate it. Like, doesn't matter where you're diagnosed and what hospital, what state, wherever. If you're a diabetic, you have a code, and that code's the same code for all diabetics. And so what makes it easy for insurance to collect data and to pay out on things is they have a code. And that allows them to, again, collect lots of data and be able to set premiums and so forth that we don't have that in veterinary medicine. We do have diagnostic coding. There are systems in place, and some people use them, and some electronic medical records are connected to them, but it's not forced and it's not uniform. So that's one problem, but that's not the biggest problem. Here's the biggest problem, and it kind of goes back to my friend's friend who had the new puppy, is that sometimes we don't get the diagnosis. And it's not because veterinarians aren't good at what they do. It's just that we don't always get a clear-cut actual diagnosis. And here's one of the reasons, and it probably has happened to maybe some of you in the audience, is you have your puppy, you got your new puppy, yay! And a month later, you're coming home from work and there's just vomit in the kitchen and diarrhea and it's gross. And you're like, oh my God, scoop up the puppy, take the puppy to the veterinarian. So you take the puppy to the veterinarian and the veterinarian does a full exam, vitals, and the puppy's, you know, pretty happy. It's a little sad, but you know, overall tail wagging, that kind of thing. The veterinarian doesn't find anything on physical, normal vitals. Everything looks good. Puppy's still wagging tail. So they say, you have a couple options here. One is I can give Fluffy an antiemetic injection, and you can take her home and just feed a bland diet for a few days. And then you can walk her back into her regular food and see if that takes care of the problem. Or we can run full blood work and we can do some x-rays, and just make sure there's nothing really, you know, substantially horrible wrong with Fluffy. And that's going to cost $1,000. You've gotten that presented to you by a veterinarian as an either or option because Fluffy looks pretty good. Doesn't happen all the time because if Fluffy was looking worse, maybe not an either or, right? But Fluffy's looking pretty good. So I think most people would. Like, I don't want to put Fluffy through all this, and I certainly don't want to necessarily spend $1,000. So let's try this other one. Let's give her a shot and I'll take her home. And guess what? Fluffy gets better. Happens all the time, right? Well, then you're scared. You're like, oh my God, I could have had to spend $1,000. So you get your pet insurance. 2 months later, you come home from work, Fluffy did it again, vomit. This time, maybe she's a little punkier, so you still took her to the veterinarian. But guess what? That's a pre-existing condition now. Because there was no diagnosis on that first vomiting and diarrhea episode, no one knows. You don't know, the vet doesn't know, the dog doesn't know, and the insurance company certainly doesn't know if that vomiting was the same as this vomiting. So we're going to say it is because it's a pre-existing condition and there's no way you're going to argue against it. Happens all the time. And it even happens in human medicine. Like sometimes I don't, elect to get all the stuff and the whiz bangs done. And that's fine. That's not necessarily a bad decision. It just makes it really hard for the insurance companies and you to argue what's a pre-existing condition and what's not. Same with limping. Same thing with limping. A lot of times dog could limp, take it to the vet. We never found anything, went home, got insurance. 4 months later, limping on same leg. Same limping? Don't know. So that's why, in order to avoid pre-existing conditions, you get the policy when you get the pet. Now, sometimes if you're getting the pet from a humane society, like Humane Society of Connecticut, and they have a veterinarian on staff, they might find something up with that pet and they're going to document it, but that's a pre-existing condition. But guess what? You know that before you get the pet, and then you can make the decision. A lot of times in the shelter, there is no documented problem with the pet. They were found and perfectly healthy, but just happened to be in the shelter, even if they're 3 years of age. A lot of times we actually don't even know how old they are, but nothing documented in the medical record, not a pre-existing condition. And in fact, here's the story of my cat, because I was a veterinarian and a practice owner. So guess what? I didn't pay for veterinary care until I retired. So I didn't have pet insurance. I got it when my cat was 10 years of age. And she didn't have any pre-existing conditions. She was completely healthy throughout her entire life. And at the age of 10, she was diagnosed with a lung tumor. And as a veterinary surgeon, I actually know that lung tumors can be completely removed in cats and they can go on to live a completely normal life. And so I had her on pet insurance about a year before this happened. And I took her to my friend because I would never do surgery on my own pet, but she did it. And we had a CAT scan ahead of time to make sure it hadn't spread. CAT scan, lung tumor removed, not just lung tumor removed, actually a whole lobe of lung removed. She did great, fantastic recovery, $14,000. Within 2 weeks, I had 80% of that in a check back in my pocket because she had no pre-existing conditions, even though she was 10, even though it was cancer, even though it was at a specialty clinic, completely paid back. So that's not unusual. If you can, again, avoid any arguments with the insurance company, make sure there's no pre-existing conditions because you get the insurance when you get the pet. And then finally, I think my slide here is to really say, I showed you a lot of math. I showed you a lot of costs, and hopefully maybe cleared up some of the fuzziness around that. But really the bottom line is with pet insurance, it's a peace of mind. No matter how much we love our pets, which I can guarantee you everybody on this call does, anytime you walk into the veterinary clinic, anytime you walk in anywhere spending money, it's human nature, doesn't matter if it's the veterinary clinic or elsewhere, your brain is going to think about the finances. They've actually shown people with pet insurance will go to the veterinarian sooner with an issue than those who don't. Everybody loves their pets. It has to do with there's something about finances that we all hate. And I can guarantee you the veterinary team would rather spend time talking to you about the medicine, about what's best to do for your pet from a medical perspective than a financial perspective. And that's what pet insurance can help you do too, is de-stress yourself. and focus on what's going on with your loved one, your pet. I know we have time for some questions, so I'm just going to kind of close down. I had some stories, but I'm running a little over here, so we'll walk through. That's Cookie, one of the cases that we helped with his dad Harvey here. And that's what we do. We help for those that can't afford pet insurance or can't afford some of these resources. We do provide funding in the San Francisco Bay Area, which again is one of our costlier areas of the country. And if you really found these tips helpful, we have lots of other tips on our website or our newsletter that can help you keep your pets healthy. That's one of our other missions, is education. So I really want to thank the Connecticut Humane Society and Hannah and Ashley for having me here today.
That was wonderful, Dr. Smith. Thank you so much. So we'll give it another minute or so. I don't see any questions coming through at the moment. Oh, wait, we just got one. Are there certain breeds that can't be insured?
Thank you for remembering. I forgot to do that. So certain breeds can be insured, but they're going to cost you more money depending on the policy, because inherited conditions are generally covered nowadays. Used to be completely excluded, but you will pay more for them. And unfortunately, the favorite breed of America right now is the French Bulldog. The French Bulldog probably has more problems than any other breed out there. In fact, the Netherlands have outlawed them because they don't think they can have a quality of life. So do research again, not only research around pet insurance, but research the breed before you make a decision about it. And certainly talk to your veterinarian, because we can point you at, I had a friend who wanted a squishy face breed, and I said, maybe not the French Bulldog, but a Boston Terrier has less problems, so definitely breeds do have an influence on the cost of pet insurance, as they should, because they're at a higher risk for getting things, especially certain breeds.
Right. Thank you. That was a great answer to that question. All right. So it looks like we have another one. So let me just make sure. So someone is just asking if anyone knows of any pet insurance companies that will insure a dog over 9 years old.
Definitely will, for sure. Now, again, you might pay a little bit more than that for that if you didn't get the policy when they were younger. So totally, that's what the difference between pet insurance nowadays is, that you can find pet insurance companies that will insure. That being said, you may pay more if the dog has pre-existing conditions at the age of 9. So remember, insurance is just a game of, they don't want to give money out. And in order for them to mitigate that risk, they're going to charge you more if you're more likely to need them. That's the same thing with, like, I think here in California is like Cybertrucks. Well, we're not going to go into why you should buy a Tesla or not. But anyway, Cybertrucks, there's problems with them. Their insurance is crazy because of it. So that's just the nature of insurance.
All right. It looks like, so someone in the chat had mentioned that a disease wasn't covered for her Bernese Mountain Dog. I believe. How common is this, that maybe a specific disease isn't covered? Is that something you hear a lot, or?
You got to read the insurance companies. The best insurance companies do not have exclusions. You can find insurance companies that do not have exclusions. And so you just have to do the research on that. Especially if you do have I think a breed like a Bernese Mountain Dog, unfortunately, is one of those breeds that can have quite a few things. And I think nowadays too, even within the last 5 years, pet insurance companies have changed dramatically. So if some of these stories are 10 years ago, newer companies have come out even in the last 5 years, and a lot of them have come from Europe and from the UK, which they have a much higher percentage of coverage. But there's always horror stories. If I named a particular pet insurance company, I'd have, 5 of you raising your hand going, I love them, and 5 of you raising your hand with a horror story.
Who just wanted to thank you so much and thought this was really helpful. She just said, with 4 pets, I have been put off by premiums, but plan on looking into it again. And then in our chat, another question came in. If an animal is over a certain age, are you usually insuring against accidents versus diseases? They kind of it may be similar to the point you just made, but
Yeah. Accident and illness policy, there are accident only policies. I think accident and illness is still the way to go. As I said, my cat, 10 years of age, she's now 2 years out after her lung tumor. She's fine. So age is not a disease. I like to say that now that I have gray hair, especially. Age is not a disease. There's some very healthy old people and some very healthy old animals, and there's very unhealthy in younger. So I think again, the age of 9 and 10 is not even that old now in pet years, or however we're counting them now. But it's really about what's going on with the pet. So if you have a 9 or 10-year-old animal with no pre-existing conditions, there's nothing for the insurance company except for to say, we always increase a price over this amount. Not all insurance companies do. So look around for that too. I mean, I can tell you the one that didn't, because my cat had it, but it's a cat only. It's Felix. So, so dog owners can't get that one. But so that's why I'm saying all the companies are different with that. So, you can look through that, and that should be able to be easily found before you buy the insurance. You should be able to see any of that small print.
So much. I'll give it another second to just see if anything else comes in. But it looks like all the questions were answered. So thank you so much again, Dr. Smith. And please keep a lookout on your email, everyone. You will be getting a recording of this talk. So if you do want to look back and rewatch it or re-listen to an answer to a question, feel free to do so. And please fill out a survey, which you will also receive. So hopefully we can continue bringing more talks to you about topics that are of interest.
And Hannah, I'll make sure and get our general email in your thank you, so that if you have a particular question for me, you can reach out directly to me. So.
I am going to just put the link to our next pet talk in the chat. It's actually going to be a pet talk workshop, Paint Your Pet. So registration is open if you are interested in signing up. We have a very limited amount of seats for that in Newington. So I'm going to put it up there right now. It'll go in your email as well, but if you want to register for that, you can do so there. And like we said, thanks for joining tonight, everybody.
Thank you.